Madeline Carter was never supposed to be in that courtroom. Framed for a murder she didn't commit, she found herself at the center of a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The evidence against her was overwhelming: surveillance footage, forged documents, and a legal system determined to see her convicted. But Madeline wasn't just an ordinary woman. She had secrets of her own. And when the truth started to unravel, the hunters became the hunted. From high-stakes courtroom battles to backroom deals with corrupt officials, she fought to expose the real criminals, powerful figures who would do anything to keep their sins buried. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. Judges, prosecutors, even the FBI, no one could be trusted. As bodies started to fall and enemies closed in, Madeline had one final chance to prove her innocence and bring down the system that had turned against her. Will she survive long enough to see justice served? Stay tuned to find out. And if you love gripping, action-packed stories filled with twists and turns, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Madeline Carter's steak knife clattered against the porcelain plate. The restaurant's chandelier lights reflected off the polished silverware, creating a moment of eerie stillness before the chaos erupted. A uniformed officer grabbed her wrist, yanking her to her feet. The murmurs around the restaurant turned into gasps. Madeline Carter, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Reeves. Murder? The name barely registered. I think you have the wrong person, she said, keeping her voice calm. The officer ignored her, snapping cold steel cuffs around her wrists. You have the right to remain silent. Madeline's heart pounded. She had been trained for situations like this, but not in this setting. Not when she was supposed to be invisible. They dragged her outside, where flashing red and blue lights illuminated the night. Cameras from bystanders recorded every second, feeding the media frenzy that would soon paint her as a killer. Inside the police car, she took a steady breath. The way the officers handled her was off, too aggressive, too rehearsed. Something wasn't right. At the station, she was led straight into an interrogation room. Detective Logan Mills sat across from her, a man with tired eyes and a sharp mind. He slid a folder across the table. We have you on camera leaving the crime scene. He opened the folder, revealing still images from security footage. There she was, same dark hair, same confident stride, walking away from a murder scene she had never been to. Plot twist. This is fake, she said. I wasn't there. Mills leaned back. That's what they all say. Before she could respond, the door burst open. 3 men in black suits entered. One of them flashed a badge. FBI. We're taking over this case. Mills stood. No, you're not. She was arrested on our watch. She stays here. The lead agent's expression didn't change. She's a federal asset. Mills narrowed his eyes at her. Who are you really? Madeline held his gaze. She had spent years mastering deception, but the truth was about to come out whether she wanted it or not. Because if someone was willing to frame her for murder, it meant they were afraid of what she knew. And that meant she had just become the most dangerous person in this room. Detective Logan Mills stared at Madeline Carter, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. The FBI's sudden intervention didn't sit well with him. Federal agencies didn't just show up at random precincts in the middle of the night unless something much bigger was at play. She's a federal asset? Mills repeated, his eyes shifting between Madeline and the lead agent. Then why is she in my custody instead of a secure facility? The agent didn't flinch. That's classified. Mills scoffed. Convenient. So, what now? You take her, and we pretend she was never here? That's the idea. Before Mills could argue further, Madeline spoke for the first time since the agents had arrived. Her voice was calm, controlled. I'm not going anywhere. The room fell silent. Mills folded his arms, intrigued. You don't want to clear your name? Madeline turned toward the FBI agent. If I go with you, I disappear, right? The agent hesitated. Thought so, she murmured. That was all Mills needed to hear. Something about this case stunk to high heaven, and he had no intention of handing his suspect over without answers. "She's staying here," he said. "You don't have a choice," the agent countered, reaching into his suit jacket. Madeline saw it before anyone else did, the slight movement, the shift in posture. The moment the agent's hand went for his concealed weapon, she moved. In one fluid motion, she yanked her cuffs forward, knocking over the interrogation table. It slammed into the agent's chest, sending him staggering back. The second agent drew his gun, but Madeline was faster. She twisted her body, bringing her cuffed hands down hard against his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Mills barely had time to react before Madeline pivoted, wrapping the chain of her cuffs around the third agent's neck and pulling tight. He gasped, struggling, before collapsing unconscious. The entire fight took less than 10 seconds. Mills watched in stunned silence as Madeline grabbed the fallen agent's gun, aiming it at the lead agent, who was now pressed against the wall. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The agent glared at her. "You have no idea who you're up against. Try me." The door burst open before she could get an answer. More officers flooded in, guns drawn. "Stand down," one of them barked. Madeline glanced at Mills, debating her next move. He met her gaze, and, for the first time, he hesitated. He had just witnessed a woman, in handcuffs, take down 3 trained federal agents in seconds. Who the hell was she? "Let her go," Mills ordered. The officers hesitated. "Are you crazy?" one of them whispered. Mills looked at the unconscious agents, then back at Madeline. "You want to prove your innocence? Get out of here before these guys wake up and bury the truth." Madeline nodded, tossing the gun aside. She knew better than to leave with a federal weapon in her possession. Mills grabbed the keys from his belt and unlocked her cuffs. "Go, before I change my mind." She didn't waste time. Within seconds, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the precinct's back hallways. By the time the FBI agents came to, Madeline Carter was already free. And somewhere in the city, the real fight was just beginning. Detective Logan Mills sat at his desk, running a hand through his hair. The precinct was in chaos. 3 unconscious FBI agents, an escaped suspect, and no clear explanation. He had let Madeline Carter go. He should have arrested her, should have kept her in custody. But deep down he knew something was wrong with the case. And if the FBI wanted her gone, that meant she wasn't the villain here. His phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak. He sighed and picked up. "Mills, tell me it's not true." Claire's voice came sharp and accusing. "Tell me you didn't just let our prime murder suspect escape." Mills hesitated. "It's complicated." Claire's frustrated sigh came through the receiver. "Complicated? Do you have any idea what you've done?" The trial was expedited. Madeline Carter is expected in court tomorrow morning. And now she's missing. Mills frowned. Expedited? That doesn't make sense. A case like this should take weeks to build. "Exactly," Claire agreed. "Someone's pulling strings to rush this through." Mills's mind raced. Who's the judge? Judge Nathan Holloway. Mills cursed under his breath. Holloway was known for taking high-profile cases, but something about this felt wrong. "Listen, Claire, something bigger is happening. The FBI came demanding to take Carter away. When I refused, they pulled guns. She took them down like it was nothing. You're telling me she fought off federal agents?" 3 of them, Mills confirmed. In handcuffs. Silence. Then Claire whispered, "Mills, who the hell is she?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think she's the one being hunted." Claire exhaled. "Regardless, if she doesn't show up in court tomorrow, she'll be convicted in absentia. And that means they can legally put a target on her back," Mills finished grimly. Whoever had framed her wasn't just trying to lock her up. They wanted her erased. Mills grabbed his coat. "I need to find her before someone else does." Madeline Carter moved through the alleyways with precision, blending into the late-night city streets. She had no weapons, no phone, no resources. But she had something better: instincts. She needed to know why someone wanted her silenced. And that meant showing up to court. But she wouldn't walk in unprepared. She slipped into an old warehouse, a forgotten CIA safe house she hadn't used in years. It was risky, but she needed access to the agency's network. Booting up an encrypted laptop, she bypassed firewalls until she found the sealed case file on Daniel Reeves, the man she had supposedly murdered. What she found made her blood run cold. Reeves wasn't just some random victim. He was a former CIA analyst. And his last recorded project? Investigating corruption within the U.S. justice system. She scrolled further. Names appeared: judges, prosecutors, law enforcement. And there it was, Judge Nathan Holloway. Her trial was rigged from the start. Whoever killed Reeves knew he was close to exposing something. And now they needed a scapegoat. Her. Madeline shut the laptop. She needed to get to court. But not to defend herself, to expose the truth. And she knew exactly who could help her. Detective Logan Mills pushed through the doors of the courthouse, his badge flashing as he bypassed security. The entire building buzzed with tension. Reporters gathered outside, cameras rolling, waiting for the biggest trial of the year. Madeline Carter's trial. Except she was missing. Mills spotted Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak pacing near the courtroom entrance, her expression tense. "Tell me you have something," she said the moment he reached her. Mills exhaled. "I know why they want her gone." Claire crossed her arms. "I'm listening." Daniel Reeves was a former CIA analyst investigating judicial corruption. Judge Nathan Holloway is on the list of officials he flagged before he was killed. Claire's eyes widened. "You think Holloway is involved?" "I think this trial is a setup," Mills said. "The prosecution is rushing the case. The FBI tried to take Carter without explanation. And now you're telling me they'll convict her in absentia? They're tying up loose ends." Claire hesitated. "If this is true, then Carter needs to testify. We need her in this courtroom." Mills nodded. "And I think I know where she is." Inside an abandoned parking garage, Madeline Carter adjusted the hood of her sweatshirt, scanning the area. She had arranged a meeting, but she knew better than to trust blindly. A car pulled up, the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. Jack Calloway, her former partner, her former everything. "You're a hard woman to find," Jack said, his voice unreadable. Madeline folded her arms. "You're not supposed to be looking for me." Jack smirked. "And yet, here we are." She studied him. He had the same confident stance, the same sharp blue eyes. But there was something else: concern. "You know what's happening, don't you?" she asked. Jack nodded. "You were set up, Maddie. Reeves got too close to something big, and now the people who silence him are coming for you." "Judge Holloway is part of it," she said. Jack's expression darkened. "Not just Holloway. There's a network inside the system. Prosecutors, law enforcement, even some federal agents. Reeves was close to exposing them." Madeline clenched her jaw. "Then I need to go to court." Jack blinked. "You do realize walking into that courthouse is a death sentence, right?" "Not if I have the right leverage." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a flash drive. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What's on it?" "Everything Reeves was working on," she said. "If I testify, I don't just clear my name, I take them all down." Jack sighed. "Then I guess I'm coming with you." Madeline narrowed her eyes. "Why would you risk it?" His smirk returned. "You think I'd let you have all the fun?" Judge Nathan Holloway tapped his gavel impatiently. "If the defendant does not appear within the next 10 minutes, I will proceed with sentencing in absentia." Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak stood at the prosecution table, her hands clenched into fists. Mills sat in the back of the courtroom, checking his watch. "Come on, Carter." The doors burst open. Madeline Carter strode in, Jack Calloway beside her. The courtroom erupted with gasps. Cameras flashed. Judge Holloway's expression tightened. "You finally decided to show up, Miss Carter." Madeline ignored him, walking straight to the witness stand. "I'm here to testify," she said. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. "About what?" Holloway asked, feigning ignorance. Madeline pulled out the flash drive and held it up. "About why I was framed. About who really killed Daniel Reeves. And about the corruption that's been infecting this court for years." Judge Holloway's knuckles turned white. Against the gavel, for the first time, he looked afraid. A hush fell over the courtroom as Madeline Carter held up the flash drive. Judge Nathan Holloway's fingers tightened around his gavel, but his expression remained unreadable. "Miss Carter," the judge said, his voice forced into neutrality, "this is highly irregular. The prosecution has already presented evidence against you. If you wish to mount a defense, you should have done so through proper legal channels." Madeline's lips curled into a slight smile. "I'm sure you'd prefer that, Your Honor. But considering I was framed by people who manipulate those legal channels, I figured I'd take my chances here in open court." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak rose to her feet. "Your Honor, given the nature of these claims, I request that we hear what Miss Carter has to say. If her allegations are unfounded, it will be evident soon enough." Judge Holloway hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the prosecution table, where Mark Evans, the state's lead prosecutor, sat stiffly. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Madeline noticed. She turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution claims I murdered Daniel Reeves. They say they have video evidence of me at the scene. What they don't tell you is that the footage has been altered. And Daniel Reeves wasn't just some random victim, he was a CIA analyst investigating corruption within the justice system. This court included." Gasps rippled through the room. "This is absurd," Evans snapped. "Miss Carter is trying to distract from the fact that she was caught on camera committing a crime." Madeline tilted her head. "Then, let's examine the evidence." She plugged the flash drive into a laptop connected to the courtroom's main monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing security footage of her doppelganger walking out of the crime scene. And then, the digital overlay began to dissolve. The figure morphed, her face shifting into someone else's for a fraction of a second before the footage reset. The jury leaned forward, eyes wide. "Your Honor," Claire interjected, "this clearly shows video manipulation. The technology used is called deepfake layering, a known tool for framing individuals by falsifying security footage. If the prosecution claims this is authentic, they need to explain these inconsistencies." Judge Holloway's expression darkened. "Prosecutor Evans, do you have an explanation for this?" Evans swallowed hard. This is irrelevant. Even if the footage was tampered with, we still have motive." "You mean the fabricated motive?" Madeline cut in. "Because Reeves was never my target. He was killed for what he uncovered." She tapped a key on the laptop, opening a folder labeled Confidential, Reeves Investigation. The first document appeared on screen. A list of names, prosecutors, judges, law enforcement officials. At the very top, Nathan Holloway and Mark Evans. The room erupted. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel. "Order!" His voice wavered ever so slightly. "This is an outrageous breach of protocol." Madeline smiled coldly. "What's outrageous is that you thought you could silence me." Suddenly, Evans shot to his feet. "This trial is over," he barked. "Your Honor, we must dismiss these claims immediately." Before Holloway could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. A team of federal marshals strode in, led by none other than Jack Calloway. "Actually," Jack said, flashing a badge, "this trial is just getting started." He turned to Holloway. "Judge, you are hereby placed under federal investigation for judicial corruption. Prosecutor Evans, you're coming with us too." Evans paled. "You have no authority." Jack tossed a folder onto the prosecution's table. "Signed warrant, courtesy of the U.S. Attorney's Office." The color drained from Holloway's face. A murmur of disbelief swept through the jury. Madeline turned toward them, her voice steady. I was framed, but the real criminals sat in this very courtroom, hiding behind the law they swore to uphold. She took a breath. The only question left is, will you do the right thing? The jury foreman met her gaze and nodded. Across the room, Judge Holloway slumped in his chair. He knew it was over. Justice had finally caught up to him. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters whispered hurriedly into their microphones. Cameras flashed, and spectators murmured in disbelief. Judge Nathan Holloway sat frozen at the bench, his normally commanding presence crumbling under the weight of the evidence now displayed for all to see. Madeline Carter stood at the witness stand, her heart pounding, but her face unreadable. She had faced enemies in the field, but this was different. Here, in a court of law, justice wasn't decided by who had the best aim, it was decided by those who had the truth. And now, the truth was out. Jack Calloway and the federal marshals moved swiftly, placing Judge Holloway and Prosecutor Mark Evans under arrest. Holloway, still gripping his gavel like it could somehow restore his authority, shook his head. "This is a joke," he muttered, his voice strained. "A setup." Jack smirked. "You would know all about that, wouldn't you, Judge?" Evans, still seated at the prosecution's table, wasn't nearly as composed. He bolted to his feet. "You can't do this," he barked. "This is a courtroom. You can't just walk in here and enough." Holloway snapped, his facade of control slipping. "Evans, sit down." For once, the prosecutor obeyed. Jack handed a thick folder to the federal agents. "This contains evidence linking both men to a network of judicial corruption, falsified convictions, and direct involvement in the murder of Daniel Reeves." Claire Novak, the assistant district attorney, stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Judge Holloway, as per judicial procedure, you are being removed from this case immediately. Another judge will be assigned to oversee the remainder of these proceedings." One of the marshals turned to Holloway. "Please stand, Your Honor." It was a bitter irony. The judge, who had sentenced countless individuals, now stood to hear his own fate. The gavel he had wielded so carelessly no longer held power. He stood, lifting his chin defiantly. "You're making a mistake." Jack nodded toward the evidence still displayed on the courtroom monitor. "I think the only mistake was assuming you'd never get caught." The marshals led Holloway and Evans toward the exit, but not before Evans turned back toward Madeline. "This isn't over," he hissed. She met his glare with an unwavering gaze. "Yes, it is." The heavy courtroom doors closed behind them. A silence fell over the room. Then the jury foreman stood. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the replacement judge now presiding, "in light of the overwhelming evidence that Miss Carter was framed, the jury unanimously finds her not guilty." A wave of relief flooded Madeline's chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. The judge nodded solemnly. "The court acknowledges this verdict and officially clears Madeline Carter of all charges. This trial is adjourned." The gavel fell for the final time. Applause erupted from the spectators. Reporters rushed toward the front, desperate to capture the moment, but Madeline ignored them. She turned to Claire, who exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "I can't believe we just took down a sitting judge." Madeline gave a small smile. "Neither can he." Mills approached next, crossing his arms. "So, you were telling the truth the whole time?" She arched an eyebrow. "That was never in question." He exhaled. "Guess I owe you an apology." Madeline smirked. "I'll take a favor instead." Jack walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. "Well, Carter, looks like you're a free woman again. Any plans?" She studied him for a moment before replying. "I don't know, but something tells me this isn't the last time I'll be in a courtroom." Jack chuckled. "No, probably not." She looked past him toward the heavy courtroom doors. They had closed behind her once before, locking her into a fight she never saw coming. But this time, when she stepped through them, she would be in control of what came next. Without another word, she walked forward, and this time, no one stopped her. The cold morning air hit Madeline Carter as she stepped out of the courthouse. The sky was painted in muted grays, a fitting backdrop for the storm she had just survived. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones shoved in her direction, cameras capturing every moment of her newfound freedom. Miss Carter, how does it feel to be cleared of all charges? Were you really framed by Judge Holloway? Will you take legal action against the state? Madeline ignored them, her focus locked ahead. She had spent days trapped in a system designed to destroy her, and now that she was free, she had no intention of wasting time reliving it for the press. Jack Calloway walked beside her, keeping his pace slow and casual, but his eyes were constantly scanning. He was protecting her, whether she asked for it or not. Detective Logan Mills and Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak caught up with them at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "You know they won't stop coming after you," Mills said. Madeline glanced at him. "Then I won't stop either." Claire sighed. "Holloway and Evans will face trial, but they weren't working alone. There's an entire network that needs to be taken down." Jack smirked. "And I'm guessing you two aren't the type to let this slide?" Mills folded his arms. "Not a chance." Madeline looked between them. These were people who had doubted her, who had seen her as nothing more than a fugitive. But now they were standing beside her, willing to fight a battle much bigger than any of them had anticipated. She took a breath. "Then let's make sure the right people end up in court next time." Mills nodded. "We'll keep digging. But what about you?" Madeline hesitated. She had spent years operating in the shadows, living a life where the truth was often a liability. But today, in that courtroom, she had seen what real justice looked like. Maybe it was time to fight for it in the open. She looked up at the towering courthouse behind her. "I think I might stick around." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You? Trading in covert ops for legal battles?" She smirked. "Let's just say I'm considering a career change." Claire chuckled. "Well, if you ever want to put your expertise to use, the DA's office could use someone like you." Madeline glanced at her, intrigued. "I'll think about it." She turned to Jack. "And you?" Jack shrugged. "I go where the action is." Madeline smiled. "Then I guess we'll be seeing each other again." He grinned. "Wouldn't miss it." She took a final glance at the courthouse, the place where she had nearly lost everything, and where she had taken it all back. Then, without another word, she walked forward. And this time, she wasn't running. She was ready. The city courthouse loomed behind Madeline Carter as she walked away, but she knew she wasn't done with it yet. The trial had cleared her name, but it had also exposed something much bigger, a corrupt judicial network that wouldn't crumble with just one conviction. She had spent years operating in the shadows, following orders, without questioning who was pulling the strings. But now, for the first time, she had the chance to fight back on her terms. Jack Calloway strolled beside her, hands in his pockets, watching her with amusement. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he said. Madeline glanced at him. "Thinking about what?" "That job offer." She smirked. "I never said yes." "You never said no either." They reached the parking lot, where Detective Logan Mills and Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak were waiting. Mills leaned against his car, arms crossed, while Claire flipped through her phone, no doubt already working on the next legal move. "You two sure you want to stick around?" Mills asked, eyeing Madeline and Jack. "Depends," Jack said. "Are you asking as a cop or as someone who just helped a fugitive expose a corrupt judge?" Mills shook his head. "I'm asking as someone who knows this fight isn't over." Claire looked up. "Holloway's conviction is already sending shockwaves through the system. Other judges, prosecutors, and high-ranking officials who were part of his network are scrambling. Some are lawyering up. Some are disappearing." Madeline wasn't surprised. "They know they're next." Claire nodded. "We need hard evidence if we're going to take the rest of them down." That means sealed court records, internal memos, off-the-books transactions. Everything Holloway and Evans kept hidden. Jack whistled. You're talking about breaking into some serious places. Claire gave him a pointed look. I said we need evidence, not a break-in. Jack grinned. Right. Of course. Mills sighed. Look, as much as I hate to admit it, we're going to need your help. You and Calloway have access to information we don't. And you clearly have a talent for making things happen. Madeline raised an eyebrow. You mean bending the law? Mills hesitated. I prefer working the angles. Jack chuckled. So we do things your way until we don't. Exactly, Claire said. Madeline thought for a moment. She had been ready to walk away, to put this entire nightmare behind her. But now, she had a chance to do something bigger, to take down the very people who had spent years manipulating the justice system from the inside. I'm in, she finally said. Jack smirked. Guess that means I'm in too. Claire exhaled in relief. Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Mills pulled out a file and handed it to Madeline. This is everything we have so far. Court documents, case files, financial records, what little we've managed to dig up. Madeline flipped through the pages. Names, dates, case numbers. Some of the most powerful figures in the justice system were listed here. If we go after them, they'll fight back, she said. Mills nodded. They already are. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. What is it? Jack asked. She turned the phone toward them. A news alert flashed across the screen. Breaking news. Federal judge found dead in his home, suspected suicide. Madeline's stomach clenched. She recognized the name immediately. Judge Aaron Whitmore. One of the people on the list. They're cleaning house, she said grimly. Jack frowned. Or sending a message. Mills exhaled. Either way, we need to move fast. Madeline closed the file and looked up. Then let's get to work. The weight of the case file sat heavy in Madeline Carter's hands. Every name on the list was a person who had twisted the justice system to serve their own agenda. Judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, people who had the power to decide who walked free and who spent their life behind bars. And now one of them was dead. Judge Aaron Whitmore's so-called suicide had sent a message. The people behind this conspiracy weren't just running scared. They were willing to eliminate their own to keep the truth buried. Madeline, Jack Calloway, Detective Logan Mills, and Assistant District Attorney Claire Novak sat in a dimly lit conference room at a safe house provided by federal marshals. The room smelled of stale coffee and old paper, the walls covered in maps and legal documents detailing the corruption that Holloway and Evans had helped facilitate. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So, what's our next move? Wait for another suicide to show up on the news? Claire shook her head. No, we make the next move. We have enough evidence to go after the rest of them, but we need airtight proof before we can bring it to court. Otherwise, they'll find a way to slip through the cracks. Mills tapped the file. Whitmore was just the beginning. We need to get to someone before they do. Someone who's still alive and scared enough to talk. Madeline flipped through the documents. Judge Eleanor Vance. She was appointed to the federal court system 5 years ago, and she handled several high-profile cases tied to Holloway's network. If anyone knows how deep this goes, it's her. Jack smirked. And how do we get a federal judge to flip on her colleagues? Madeline met his gaze. We remind her that she's next. 2 hours later, they were parked outside Judge Vance's estate, a sleek, modern home surrounded by a high metal fence and state-of-the-art security. She's not going to open the door, Mills said, eyeing the surveillance cameras. She will, Madeline replied, stepping out of the car. Jack followed. And if she doesn't? Madeline smirked. Then we knock louder. They approached the gate. Before they could even press the intercom, a voice crackled through the speaker. I have no interest in whatever you're selling. Leave. Madeline looked directly into the camera. Judge Vance, I assume you've heard about Whitmore. Silence. Madeline continued. You're on the same list. You know it. And so do the people clean up loose ends. Another pause. Then the gate buzzed open. Jack whistled. See? You just had to say the magic words. They entered the house, where Judge Vance stood stiffly in the grand foyer. Her once meticulously styled hair was disheveled, dark circles under her eyes betraying her lack of sleep. You have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't call the police, she said. Madeline held up a flash drive. Because this contains enough evidence to take down the entire operation. But, without your testimony, it won't be enough. Vance's jaw tightened. You have no idea how dangerous these people are. Jack scoffed. Oh, I think we do. Mills stepped forward. Judge, we're offering you protection. You testify, and we make sure you don't end up like Whitmore. Vance hesitated. And if I refuse? Madeline's voice was calm but firm. Then you'll be in a courtroom again soon, but this time you'll be the defendant. Silence stretched between them. Then Vance exhaled, shoulders sagging. Fine. I'll testify. Madeline nodded. Good choice. But deep down, she knew this was far from over. Because if they had reached Judge Vance, that meant the people pulling the strings knew exactly where to find her too. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back, their cameras capturing every tense moment. Federal marshals flanked the room, their presence a stark reminder of the danger surrounding this case. At the center of it all, Judge Eleanor Vance sat at the witness stand, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Madeline Carter sat beside Claire Novak at the defense table. Across from them, the new prosecutor assigned to the case, Samuel Reed, adjusted his tie, ready to present what could be the most explosive testimony in modern judicial history. But everyone knew the real trial wasn't happening in this courtroom. It was happening behind closed doors, where powerful people were deciding whether Eleanor Vance would live long enough to speak the truth. Judge Gregory Mills, a no-nonsense federal judge, presided over the hearing. He eyed the room before turning to Vance. Judge Vance, you understand that by testifying today, you are placing yourself at great personal risk. Vance swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Then proceed. Claire stood, approaching the witness stand. Judge Vance, can you confirm that you were part of a judicial network designed to manipulate court rulings for financial and political gain? Vance hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The reporters furiously took notes. Claire continued. And was Judge Nathan Holloway a key figure in this network? Yes, Vance confirmed. Holloway was responsible for assigning judges to cases where outcomes had already been decided. Prosecutors like Mark Evans ensured that innocent people were convicted, while criminals with the right connections walked free. The tension in the room was suffocating. Claire pressed on. And what about Daniel Reeves? Vance's expression darkened. Reeves got too close. He uncovered financial records linking members of our network to offshore accounts. We were told he had to be eliminated before he could testify before a federal grand jury. Madeline clenched her fists. Claire's voice remained steady. And who gave that order? Judge Vance hesitated. Judge Vance, Claire said firmly, who ordered Daniel Reeves' murder? Vance took a shaky breath. It came from the top. A Supreme Court justice. The room erupted. Judge Mills banged his gavel. Order. Order in the court. Madeline's mind raced. A Supreme Court justice. This conspiracy went deeper than she had imagined. If what Vance said was true, then even the highest levels of justice had been compromised. The prosecutor, Samuel Reed, stood. Your Honor, given the severity of these allegations, the federal government will pursue an immediate investigation into these claims. Judge Mills nodded. Agreed. This court will adjourn until further review of the evidence. As the gavel fell, Madeline exhaled. It was far from over, but for the first time, the system was fighting back. Jack Calloway approached her, a smirk playing at his lips. "Well, Carter, you just pissed off the most powerful people in the country. How's that feel?" Madeline glanced toward the courthouse doors, where federal agents were already mobilizing. "It feels like justice," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she actually believed it. Justice had been served, at least for now. But the fight wasn't over. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had realized, reaching the highest levels of power. Madeline Carter had cleared her name, but she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the last time she'd be in a courtroom. And when the next battle came, she'd be ready. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And if you love thrilling, action-packed stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one.